Welcome to Conversations on Leadership. We're inviting leaders to come in and tell us their stories and talk to us about the challenges they faced in leadership, things that have made them successful, how they've overcome the challenges, whether that be the business challenges or personal challenges that have made them better as leaders. Today, our guest is Charles Baldwin. He's the Executive Vice President of Administration at Cabela's. I've known Charles for several years, worked alongside him as a vendor to Walmart, and certainly appreciate the time we've spent together. And Charles, welcome to Conversations on Leadership.
Thank you, Tony. Great to be here.
Glad you're here. Charles, I won't tell them your entire background, but you started out with Walmart as an hourly associate.
I did.
Your move through those ranks was pretty impressive. You went from there to a store manager, then to divisional HR manager, up through the vice president of training and development, to global training talent management, and then to Cabela's. So first, tell us a little bit about that journey. A couple of things I want to ask you about that journey, and then some of the experiences or people that had such an impact on your capacity for leadership.
Most of the experiences that I have gained that have been the most impactful and ones that I reflect on frequently have been ones where I wasn't necessarily the expert. And I had to rely on a lot of people to make me successful and or the situation we were in. And I had to rely on every resource that I'd ever come in contact with. And I had to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. Okay. And I can reflect back, for example, there is one position in my career with Walmart actually that I really didn't want to take. I had it offered to me a couple of times. I didn't think it was the right move for me and my family at the time. I had a young child and one on the way, and I knew it would take me away from home a lot. And eventually I was convinced I needed to do that. Of course, I think a marriage is a partnership, yeah. And so I visited with my wife about what she felt about being a single parent, because she was going to be that for a while.
I think I know which position it was too, Charles. The one that kept you on the road for weeks at a time,
yeah,
right?
Months sometimes. Yeah. And I would tell you that was the most stressful couple of years, I think, even to date in my career. Wow. Because if things didn't go right, it would probably cost my career on a daily basis if things didn't go right. And I'm not talking about decisions that were within my control, but having to manage situations. And as I reflect on that period of time in my career, which I frequently do in leadership classes that I'll facilitate at Cabela's where I am now, or even when I'm off in other scenarios, I reflect on that as truly a fork in the road for my career, or one time that if I hadn't have taken that, I don't know that I'd be where I am today. It toughened me up as a leader. It absolutely exposed me to pieces of the business that I had no exposure to. I was really at that point in my career an operations and an HR individual, and that's unique in and of itself to say those two terms at the same time. But it stretched me in a lot of different ways, and I reflect on that frequently in the values of those experiences. Okay. So that's probably the biggest trigger point for me, inflection point in my career.
When you mentioned something there about in situations where you had no control, but the way you managed that could cost you your career. And I think of the power of influence, the power of collaboration, and being able to develop that with people. How did you develop those partnerships with people that you had no control over, but they needed to make decisions? You needed them to make decisions that you needed to knew needed to go in a particular direction. How did you develop those relationships?
One at a time. One at a time. That's for sure. I think so often people they think that there's a silver bullet to leadership, to relationship building, to communication, to whatever the decision making. Financial acumen, whatever the competency is, give me the silver bullet, give me the magic pill, I'll be good to go, I'll go to that class and get it done. And I would tell you that I'm not a believer there is. Yeah. It happens over time. How many books do you think have been written since the beginning of time?
How many books?
Yeah.
Millions.
Millions. How about 129 million?
Books.
So Google has an algorithm, and they've determined there's been 129 million books written over time.
Of any
Any
subject?
kind.
Okay.
Yeah, of any kind, since a modern time,
Right.
I guess is how they would characterize that. Let's just assume 10% are leadership books.
Probably correct. At
I
least.
would say lead, yeah,
Yeah.
I would say it's probably 30 or 40% have some kind of leadership component to them. But if only 10% of 129, that's almost 13 million books
That's a ton.
that have been written on leadership. Just between the periods of 19, I believe it is 86 and 96, there was over 18,000 articles written about leadership. That tells me we don't have it figured out.
Right.
Because if we did, you'd just write one, right?
Yeah.
And so ultimately, in all of those analyses, I've come to determine that there is no magic bullet, no one pill, one size fits all that you can take and get that knowledge. And so for me, I would tell you that it's one at a time, one relationship at a time, one situation at a time, and you don't wait. Okay. And you really get aggressive in that, and you truly tend to find that most people, I'm a true believer that nobody goes to bed at night having looked in the mirror going, I'm going to make somebody's life miserable tomorrow, you know?
Right.
And so if you know they don't want that whoever you're trying to partner with, collaborate with, et cetera, is probably feeling some angst, some stress from their point of view, whatever the situation is, then you kind of go in with a little bit of an air of confidence, not ego, confidence. There's a fine line, by the way, between the two. And it's easier to build those relationships, and you're not intimidated. And so if you're an HR person, and I get so frustrated when I go to HR conferences, and it seems like even today, people in HR are saying, how do I get a seat at the table? It's like, shut up already. You know, it's like you get a seat because if there's an open seat, you go sit in it. And if there's not one, you pull a chair from and you pull up to the table. You go do it and you have that confidence. So if somebody in HR is looking to go, and in this situation, I had to go get partnerships quickly in real estate, from HR to real estate. That doesn't, how is that? And construction and merchandising and marketing, and obviously with some operations experience that was a little more comfortable on the operations side. IT, I mean, every aspect of the business, you were having to get those partnerships and collaboration and the confidence that you can do it.
Well, and I think it's two things I heard too: your confidence and then the humility to go with an inquisitive mind with those folks. Not that I know your business, but I need your help to get something done. And humility has to make a ton of difference in how you approach those situations. Because you mentioned that fine line between ego and confidence. If you go in with the ego where I've got it all figured out, then you're telling people what to do and they get their back up and they don't want to work with you.
Yeah.
So that could be a subject in and of itself, just talking about collaboration.
That'll be version 2 of this conversation.
Yeah, actually version 2. I've been reading a lot of research recently, and you mentioned no silver bullet about leadership, but there's a lot of organizations that spend their energy on leadership. A couple of them that you would know and that I know have mentioned in their research that about 50% of leaders derail in their careers. And I got a couple of questions, at least in my mind. One of them is how does that fit with what you know about leadership in your experience? The other one is how much of that is due to the individual derailment? How much of that is due to the misalignment between them and their supervisor? Because how do you determine who derails? It's usually their supervisor that determines that they've derailed. So, those two questions. How does those stats fit with your experience? And then the other one is that alignment question. Yeah,
great questions that I have no answers to.
Okay.
But I have opinions.
Okay.
Well, I would tell you derailment, I think, is kind of, well, it really depends on what the definition is of derailment. And my definition of derailment would just be completely fail off the rails. I mean, as in a train analogy, I mean, the train is no longer on the track. Okay. It's not going anywhere. I think a lot of people, though, hit speed bumps as opposed to actual derailments. And those speed bumps begin to compound. Confidence begins to wane, is lost with the individual, then the speed bumps become bigger, and those ultimately lead to potential derailment. Sometimes supervisors start to give up on talent they've invested in when they've hit a speed bump because of the responsibility that they're in to make sure that their people are successful. And then they just cash them out and go, well, I'm going to go with train B then. If train A is not running, I'm going train B. And I think, so there's really situational leadership competencies come into play here, but I would tell you, depending on the situation, it's probably one or the other, supervisor or the individual, and occasionally or sometimes it could be a combination of the two. What I would tell you, 50 to 60% of leaders derailing sounds really high. I haven't done an analysis of late of what we would consider in our company those who have derailed. It wouldn't be that high, I can assure you. But we're a growth company, and that means that a lot of people have a lot of opportunities, not everybody vying for the same opportunity. But I would also tell you that when you look back, and it's ironic, this is not a setup, Tony, but at breakfast this morning when I was visiting with a former colleague, just how are things going and what are you focused on, and they're in this space. We gravitated to this very conversation. And there wasn't a question that I posed, it just naturally got there, and they were questioning how many new things are happening in HR, and is it the bright shiny object that we're all keep chasing, and what's the new bright shiny object today? And they said, what I always go back to is the basics. Respect for the individual, communication, good solid decision making, a foundation of morals and culture in an organization. But how do we know we don't pick the right people? And are we picking people because it was a gut feel, they're charismatic, and wow, they carry themselves really well, I think they could be the next CEO or the next vice president or what have you? And our conversation led to high school, believe it or not. Wonder where all the valedictorians are today. What percentage of valedictorians are successful? They had the best grades. They had the best in their class.
Get the best opportunities in college.
Best opportunities, scholarships, etc. And then that led to her speaking about where her valedictorian was, which they're unemployed. Where my valedictorian was, where I'm not really sure. And others who have been in jail. And I mean, the list goes on. And then we gravitate to sports, because we do that so often, Tony. And when we talk about leadership, we talk about this sports analogy of coaching, leading a team, and teamwork and all those kinds of things. The NFL draft is next week. They have been talking about the NFL draft for the last 2 months, almost to the point of it's driving me nuts. And they have changed their minds on who is going to go in the first round in the top 10 probably 50 times. And I will tell you, they will not get it right wherever they end up. Because the reality is, we're talking about people. And we're talking about how they're going to perform in the future in a role they've never been in, based upon how they're performing in a role today. And that's difference. And a lot of things happen in between now and then. For me, 50 to 60% seems very high, but in the end, I wouldn't suggest it's 10%. It's probably half the people make it and half don't. That's probably fair.
You mentioned the NFL draft, and I think the stats would tell us that those people who go in the first round don't always become those successful football players, quarterbacks, or whatever it happens to be. Part of it is, you mentioned, they never have played in that role before. We in organizations probably have a better opportunity to prepare people for the roles, the future roles, even though it's something they've never played in before. So one question is, what can organizations do to help prepare people for the next role? And what do you see that you put in place in various organizations that you've done, even from being a manager, developing an assistant manager, all the way through organization? What are you doing to prepare people? And what can or should organizations do to prepare people for the next role without just dumping them in and saying swim?
Yeah, great question. I would tell you, it is a constantly moving target. And the challenge that we look at in succession planning or in executive development and coaching is we think we know the role that we're preparing them for. But the reality is in life, in the world, in business, in sports, what we prepare them for today is how the role looks today. When they get into that role, there's a high likelihood it's going to look a lot different, or it's going to look a little different at least, and it depends on what the role is. But imagine marketing, somebody that you were managing or coaching or developing to get to become the chief marketing officer, and you focused on having them in that role or identifying them as the potential next chief marketing officer, let's say 2-3 years ago. And today they get that role. Their world absolutely changed.
Especially
in 2 to 3
in that,
years.
Yeah, especially in that area.
Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, you name it, all the components of social media and how you would market to that versus what marketing was in a traditional sense. I had a board meeting at the local university here just yesterday, and I'm on a committee specific to marketing. And one of the things we're talking about, their true tool that they've used for years to market to other universities and professors so that they can continue to try to build their credibility within this particular space of education, is a newsletter. And the newsletter, we now have a paper newsletter and we've moved to sending it electronically. Now, if you think about that for a minute, and we had a nice healthy debate yesterday, how ancient is the concept of newsletters? And oh, by the way, what's in that newsletter? Well, the minute that I printed it, it's dated. Okay, now first of all, I spent all this time, hundreds of hours collecting the data, getting it all in, and it specifically lines out like, it hits, I mean, it's a jack of all trades. It hit every component they could possibly think of. Here's what a student would want to hear, here's what alumni would want to hear, here's what a professor would want to hear, here's what my competitor universities want to hear, all those credentials or accreditation would want to hear, all that in one little newsletter. Then you find that after you get all that done, now you got to go mail it. I didn't even know that was still
Who uses that these days?
Yeah, and you have email as well. Anyway, we got into a nice long discussion where we ended up of doing nice little video vignettes, clips, 2-minute clips of alumni that we could have a YouTube channel. Ultimately, having the lead professor having a blog, having an active live Twitter account, those being the different mediums that we would utilize to market as opposed to, and we'll still have a supplemental. If you want to still go back to the library, to the books, hardbound books, we'll still provide that. But the reality is the world moved just in the last 2 or 3 years. And if you don't keep up, so if you think of that in the context of developing talent, then how do I develop somebody into a job that I don't even know what that job's going to look like?
And that's kind of what I was going to ask you. So if it's not the competencies, the skills, which is, I mean, you can teach some of those, some of them will be obsolete next year, but if it's not the skills-based development, then what is it?
It goes back to leadership.
Okay.
It goes back to the core components. And on our conversation just in this few minutes, someone could easily be watching this going, oh my gosh, that guy, does he even believe in leadership? Because he just sits there and says, here's all the impossibilities, and why would he even try? Well, the beauty of all of this and the secret is in the basics.
Yeah.
It's in communication. It's in decision making. It's in holding people accountable, setting an expectation, providing the tools. None of that has changed.
Yeah.
It's as simple as, guess what? 2 + 2 will always be 4. And any math book that's written in the beginning of time until the end of time, that will not change. Now, how you get there and all the different algorithms and does new math, and there is a new math, by the way, because my kids have taught me that.
Well, I'm way past that one. My grandkids are going to be doing that with me one of these days.
But guess what? 2 + 2 is still 4. Yes. Those things will change. The environment around it will change, and how it ultimately is kind of maneuvered and communicated, et cetera, and the vehicles and mediums will change. But in the end, it's you and I having this conversation. You build leadership through discussions, through experiences, through exposure. And yes, you need some education. And Tony, you need coaching.
Yeah.
You need a different perspective. You need a sounding board. And you have to understand that the experiences you'll probably end up being in the next role, the person in that role today never had to experience that. And that's okay.
You know, I was listening to, I had the fortune to be at a meeting recently with John Pepper, Steve Reineman, Don Soderquist, and Doug McMillan, who were speaking about just their careers. And you know who those guys are. I mean, it was a phenomenal group of people to be with. And they talked about what you just had mentioned, what I alluded to, what we discussed a little bit earlier, how critical it is for someone to invest in me as a leader and help me grow as a leader. You know, this is, I think it's a real question that I have, because I look at leadership development, and I've done training and development, I do executive coaching, those kind of things, and I'm a believer in those, but I believe they fall way down on the list of what makes a leader effective. And I think you have to have them, yes, theory and education, those things help, but what's most helpful to me is a relationship with someone who's willing to invest in me and help me be effective. Now, you didn't tell those stories when I asked you about the people who invested in you. What are the characteristics of the people that invested in you to help you get where you are? And what are you trying to teach your coaches or your supervisors to do to be a leadership developer? Because, I mean, Procter & Gamble is one who requires every one of their people to develop the people behind them. It's just part, if you can't do that, you're probably not going to make it to the next level of leadership. And yet I'm asking, what does it mean to develop that person? How do we help a person learn how to be a developer and a coach for other people?
Wow, that's a tough one, but it's an easy one, because obviously I have my own personal experiences. You know, one of the things that we used to say a lot when I worked for Walmart is, if you work yourself out of a job, you'll probably get promoted. And that's because you find ways to get more efficient, and Walmart certainly is about everyday low price and making sure you get efficiencies in the business, et cetera. But I think there's also in that an inherent component that you find ways to get other people involved in what you do, and you don't become so siloed in your approach. And I would tell you, in my experiences, I've got a mentor. In fact, I just talked to him on Monday, and he's been my mentor for the last 15 years. I talk to him once a month. He is not connected with my business. But he is connected with others, which is a nice sounding board for me. But what I really like in our relationship are two things: authenticity and candor. And I would tell you, in Cabela's, we are really focused on making sure, and we have to. I mean, obviously, if you're familiar with Cabela's, any of your audience is, you know that we really do believe in hunt, fish, camp, in the outdoors. We believe in the quality of the products that we provide. We even have our own name on our goods that we sell, we produce. We have interesting, innovative technology that I mean, just this last year, we're the only ones in the industry. We created a new product called Color Phase Camouflage that actually changed color based upon the temperature. Wow. So, I mean, different technologies like that. We have a bug-free zone that we have that's an insect kind of clothing that our CEO took to Africa about 9 months ago and literally never got bit in the marshes and the swamps of Africa. I mean, bugs would actually go just take off. They never would even land. Wow. And so that's very important. But that authenticity is what we really speak to a lot in our company, and we have to fight to maintain that. And that's not just in our products, that's in who we are. That I have to be authentic with you, Tony, and if I disagree with you, I can do that in a respectful way. I don't have to say you're ugly and your mama dresses you funny, but I do have to say, you know what, Tony, I respect your opinion. And as Stephen Covey says, we may have to agree to disagree. Yeah. But in the end, you need to understand or listen or hear, I have a point of view as well. And maybe in there is the best solution. Right. Not just your way or my way, but ultimately that highway is a combination of both. And so the authenticity and candor that I've gotten in my career, and I would tell you, anybody that reports to me today, I would be 100% confident that if you ever asked any of them, what can you count on with Charles in a one-on-one setting, is he's going to tell me the truth, whether it hurts or not. He's not going to tell me in a hurtful way, but he's going to tell me the truth. And I have several mentees that they have come to me specifically because, throughout the organization, and several not in my organization, because they know I'm at least going to give them the truth.
Yeah.
And that's what they desire. They don't sugarcoat it for me. Now, don't hurt me and don't, chop me at the knees, but give me some constructive feedback so I can go do something with it.
Truth with respect. Yeah,
yeah, that's what my kids expect.
One of the things I appreciate about you, and of course, you don't know how much impact you had on my career. We worked together when I was VP of Resources for Living.
You mean in a contract negotiation?
Yeah, well, that too. But I didn't work for Walmart, but you invited me in, at least the company invited me in to work in the home offices. And I ended up reporting at least I was under your umbrella at one point, and several others as well. The thing I noticed about all of you folks there that I ended up having that kind of a relationship with was the very thing you mentioned, is you had expectations of me, and I didn't work for you, but you had expectations of me, and you wanted me to help walk through those with you. You asked me about my accountability for those, something I didn't get in my own company, but I learned that from you guys. You're authentic about your feedback about where we were and where we needed to go, and we ended up growing our business simply because of the feedback you gave us as a supplier to you guys. And so that I saw demonstrated from you a long time ago, and it made such an impact on me.
Well, thank you.
So I think that's incredibly critical, and I keep asking. There are people with different personalities. Some are conflict avoidant, so they avoid those kind of conversations, hoping they can persuade and salve people.
Do you think that a conflict avoidant personality could be a successful leader in the long term?
If they see the feedback as a confrontation, no, they couldn't be.
Yeah, I don't either.
If they look at this as me giving you feedback is going to hurt you, and so I won't do that, they won't be successful. They've got to find a way to understand the value of that kind of feedback and that conversation. Otherwise, people don't grow and develop. In fact, one of the organizations I worked for recently was a company that it prided itself on that interpersonal sensitivity in people. Well, part of that interpersonal sensitivity resulted in people who were a little conflict avoidant. Well, guess what problems they had in their organization? They didn't confront people issues. They let them fester a little bit too long, and they'd end up blowing up. I heard Jeff Einelt speak one time. He said, there are a lot of things I wish I had done quicker than I did, and a lot of those were people issues. He said, at the time, I was trying to be patient, but not dealing with them didn't turn out so well. They don't get better with age as such.
I would have several of those regrets myself.
I appreciate the fact that people are sensitive to other people, but not dealing with those issues. And so you taught me a lot, because I came out of an environment where confronting those things was, you danced around them a little bit and tried to position them in a more soft way. Found out that you got to step into those conversations more readily and more quickly.
It's easier said than done, because you're right. I mean, no different than there's a fine line between confidence and ego. There's a fine line between yanking the cord way too fast and giving so much rope that they hang themselves.
Right.
And that is, I think that's leadership. That the variance of what that span of time is and the tolerance level you have for your organization is sensitivity to the culture of your organization, sensitivity to the business. What's the state of the business? I mean, if you're in a high stress emergency situation, the tolerance level is probably shorter. If there is an amount of time that you can expand, then the tolerance level may expand. And I think that's what most people struggle with. They want to find in the education component of the development triangle, education, experience, and exposure, they want to find what are those boundaries, and can I just put those on the wall so that ultimately I can then look and go, okay, we're here, and that's where I plot it, and what's my 4-box or 9-box, and that's the beauty of leadership too. And I think that's what really causes me to continue to be engaged in this space over many years now. It is constantly changing, but yet it's still the same.